All right. So in our session today, we're going to focus on garden scrap or kitchen scrap garden hacks. Anyway, some version of those words we're going to be talking about. So it's a continuation of what we talked about last month. The handout that let me spotlight my hands really quickly. All right. So our handout that is also going in the chat is the kitchen garden hacks. And we're just going to kind of follow along with this a little bit. And I'm going to kind of walk through how to prep some of the things. So this is kind of that quick handout, that quick reference handout. So we'll kind of follow along with this today. And I know we can put that in the chat as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is banana water. Now, there are a lot of, well, let me back up. Once we put our gardening, like our rooted vegetables and herbs back in the soil, we want to do a little fertilizing just to make sure that these vegetables, these herbs, get all the nutrients, minerals, all that wonderful stuff that they need to grow healthy and really flourish. And so one of the things we can do is, of course, buy fertilizer and use that. But the truth is there are a lot of things that we have already in our kitchen that we can use to help those plants feel and grow strong and give them what they need really to grow. And so the first one, if we look at our handout, that first one is banana water. So if you eat bananas, and we know bananas are good for us, it's good to have a banana, save those banana peels. The banana peels are loaded with potassium, and potassium is something that plants need. So if you have some banana peels, stick it in a jar of water, let it sit for a couple days. I usually take mine, like in the image here, I have it in a pitcher, but what you can do is stick it in like a mason jar of water and just let that banana peel soak in that water for a couple days. And then you can use that water and pour it over your plants. And that is loaded with potassium, which is what plants need. Plants need that to grow. It's really great, really great for flowering plants, house plants, and fruit. But it's also really good for like tomatoes and bell peppers and things like that. It honestly wouldn't hurt to put banana water on a lot of plants, right? So again, that potassium is something that plants need to really grow. And so using that banana peel, sticking a couple peels in a mason jar of water or a pitcher of water, let it sit for a few days, and then use that water. You're not using the peel, so you don't have to worry about issues with like fruit flies or things like that, or the smell, right? Because it's infused water. So you can get rid of that peel afterwards because you're just using that banana infused water. Another thing that's really helpful, speaking of watering, is to use things like potato water, vegetable water, or rice water. And so in the handout next, you'll see there are a couple illustrations about the water that you use when you're boiling potatoes or boiling vegetables. You can use that. They're loaded with things like potassium, again, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, depending on which vegetables you're using, and B vitamins. Again, things that plants need to really grow well. And flourish. And so using that water, right, the water from the boiled vegetables or the water from rice, cooking rice, is really good for plants. The only thing to keep in mind with that, though, is that if you add salt to the water while you're boiling your vegetables, don't use that to water plants. So just using that vegetable water, that potato water, that rice water, unsalted, can add a lot of nourishment to our plants as well. And I know this stuff, this is like, it's like using waste. Like when we boil potatoes, we don't think about the benefits that we get in that potato water, right? We just dump it out, but it's so good for plants, not just the vegetables and herbs that we're regrowing, but also house plants, thinking of things like pothos or snake plants or succulents, philodendron, monstera, all these house plants can also benefit from this type of water as well. And again, I just want to say, if you salt the water while you're boiling your vegetables, don't use it. Don't use it for watering your plants. The next thing I have on the handout is one that always makes me giggle. As a kid, I have this memory of my grandmother always saying, even plants need their morning cup of coffee. And she would pour out the last little bits of coffee or the dregs or the grounds into her house plants. I thought she was just being silly as a kid, but it turns out there's a lot of truth in that. Coffee grounds have a lot of nitrogen in them. And so there are some plants, some herbs and vegetables that really like high acidic soil. And so adding that nitrogen in, using those coffee grounds can be really beneficial. And those are for plants like ginger root. Ginger root loves high acidic soil. So adding the coffee grounds, mixing it in with the soil, or even adding it on top of the soil is so good for ginger. That'll help it really flourish. If you're trying to regrow mushrooms, adding those coffee grounds to it can be really, really helpful. That nitrogen is what they need to really grow and flourish. And so coffee grounds, again, another thing we're like, we dump this out or we compost it. You can actually put it directly in the plants. And I will say, I have been in several coffee shops where they give away or sell their used coffee grounds. And so this is something that even if you don't drink coffee, you can hunt down these different coffee shops and get coffee grounds that way too. But those used coffee grounds are really beneficial. They're also really good for, I think, some of the other plants that are really good or that really enjoy the coffee grounds are things like blueberries, cabbage. I think tomatoes really like the coffee grounds, but mostly it's plants that need that highly acidic soil. So mostly with ginger and mushrooms. All right, so the next one, I want to move on to eggshells. So eggshells, again, this is something we like, no, we compost eggshells, right? We know that there are benefits to using eggshells, but eggshells are packed with calcium. And so they are really good for all sorts of plants. Basically, every plant, except for the ones who like the acid loving, like acidic soil. So eggshells are not going to be good for things like mushrooms and ginger root, but they're going to be really good for basically everything else. And so I just want to kind of pull out, I have some eggshells that I've been saving here. And all I did was kind of rinse them out a little bit, clean them up just a little bit. And you don't have to do a lot of prep work for it. You want to kind of pulverize them a little bit, crush them. If you can turn them into a powder, that's good. Like if you have a mortar and pestle, that can really be good. If you don't, I know a mortar and pestle is not something that everybody has. One thing you can do is stick them in a Ziploc bag and just kind of crush them up that way. So you can see I've got my my eggshells here. And what I can do is just kind of seal that up and just start crushing that. Another benefit of using those eggshells is that it can also help with soil drainage. And it does also help protect against things like slugs and snails too. But you want to just kind of break it up as small as you can. If you have a jar or a rolling pin, you can roll it across it. But keeping it in that Ziploc bag I found is really helpful if you don't have that mortar and pestle. And you can see it just grinds out pretty easily. And then you can mix that in with the soil, right? And this is loaded, like I said, loaded with calcium, right? Which is what plants need, right? So again, it gives that calcium. It's good for soil, everything except for those plants that like high acidic soil, like ginger root and mushrooms, but everything else benefits from using those eggshells. Right? And so then you can just, like I said, add it to the soil. And you've got that little bit of calcium in there. One of the next things I want to talk about is something that I just learned very, very recently and am very excited to try. But green tea. So you can make some green tea, and that is a wonderful way to add some extra nutrients to your plant to help stimulate root growth. Right. And so that ratio, if you want to add that green tea in, that ratio is 1 tea bag to 1 gallon of water. And it really helps kind of jumpstart that root growth. There's a whole lot of nutrients that really help that root growth just kind of start. So that's something I just learned recently. Has anyone, and feel free to put it in the chat, but has anyone used green tea before? Yeah, I was talking with a few people who were like telling me like, oh yeah, it's something you should have known. I was like, how did I not know? So I'm excited to try it because apparently it's a very, very good thing to add to your plants, especially ones that you're trying to reroot. Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about, and like I said, we're going to pause in a little bit and go back for some questions. The next thing I want to talk about is at the bottom of our handout here. I just have some helpful hacks that I want to kind of go through. There are a couple things here. One is if you've done gardening before and if you've bought soil from, let's say, Home Depot or Lowe's, you may notice that there's these little white beads that are in that soil. And that's perlite. Perlite is something that is really helpful because it helps aerate the soil. When we get a lot of mold and root rot, it's because that soil is waterlogged. And so things like that perlite can help aerate the soil so it's not holding on to a whole bunch of water. So you can buy, you can buy just bags of perlite, just the white beads. You can also use, as a hack, you can use kitty litter. It does the same thing. It helps hold the water in there, hold the moisture in a safe way that doesn't waterlog that soil. And so that's always a good thing to have in there. I was talking with someone a while ago now about aerating the soil, and they had mentioned that styrofoam is something they've used every now and then. And we think styrofoam is so bad, and it is. It's so bad for the earth. But you can, like chopping it up and mixing it into a pot of soil does help aerate that soil. Of course, you don't want to use a whole lot of it, and it's definitely better to use the perlite or even the kitty litter over the styrofoam. But the idea behind it, aerating that soil, is incredibly important. And so that's kind of another little hack. If you have cats, you probably have that kitty litter. You can use that. Another thing that I've done for years that has been really, really, really helpful is using like doing bottom watering. And I know that sounds funny, but sometimes it's really hard for me to tell when I put too much water in there, like when I'm over watering or giving it just the right amount of water. And typically when we water our plants, we pour in the water from the top. So the water is going through the soil. But one thing that's really helpful and helps kind of prevent overwatering is to do bottom watering. And you can see in our illustration here that it's just taking the plant, the whole pot, and putting it in a tub of water. And what's helpful about this is that when it's going through the bottom, if the plant is soaking up the water it needs, it's not going to soak up too much. It'll take in just what it needs. So you don't have to worry about that over watering. And so what you can do, let's say I have a pot here with a plant in it. Instead of pouring that water in through the top, what I can do is take a little Tupperware or a tub and fill that with water and stick my plant right in that. The plant will soak up the water it needs, and you'll be able to see that water level go down. And then once you notice that that water level isn't moving anymore, that's the sign that the plant has taken enough water and it's ready to get out. So then you can take it out and put the next plant in. I've seen people do this with like bathtubs too, just filling the bathtub up with water and putting several plants in there. But that bottom watering I have found to be really helpful, and has stopped me from overwatering. Because sometimes you get a little overzealous and you're like, oh, it's Sunday, my water day. But sometimes plants don't need water on a regular schedule. And so it's hard to know sometimes where that line is for giving them enough water and giving them too much water. And so that bottom watering is a really easy way to kind of deal with that. The next thing I want to talk about that are on the handouts are plant lights and mirrors. And I will say, for years, I stayed away from plant lights. In my mind, they were too expensive and not worth it. But once I got one plant light, it totally revolutionized my indoor gardening game. Now I have plant lights all over my house, and it really is helpful. There are a couple different ways. If you're interested in plant lights, I definitely want to say try it out. It really is helpful. There are a couple different types of plant lights that I want to talk about. One is like a grow light. That comes all together. This is a halo light, so it's a ring that you can stick directly in your potted plant. There are so many different types of grow lights, from strips that you can screw into a ceiling or a shelf top, these grow lights that have the halos like this, or clip grow lights that you can just clip onto like a windowsill or something like that to add extra light to your plants. A lot of grow lights have timers on them, which is really nice. So you set that timer for what, 8 hours or 12 hours, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. It turns on when it needs it and turns it off when it doesn't. So the truth is, grow lights are incredibly helpful. Even low light plants need light. And in some places, it can be really gloomy at certain times of the year where there's not a lot of sun. And so having those the grow lights can be so helpful for our plants. And like I said, it totally revolutionized my indoor gardening game. The good thing about these things like the halo lights is that you stick it in one plant, right? So it focuses on one plant, but all the other plants that you have around it are getting some of that light too. So you don't necessarily have to have one of these grow lights per pot, right? Because a lot of like that light spreads out, right? It goes to all those plants. So all the plants around the grow light are getting some of those nutrients. One of the things that I would say to pay attention to if you're interested in trying out grow lights is looking for full spectrum. This is usually written out. You'll see on this box here, it says full spectrum. Full spectrum is probably the easiest grow light to start with. You get either full spectrum or you get the red-blue spectrum. Red-blue spectrum is mostly for like flowers and fruit. And it is mostly, it's the right wavelengths to help encourage photosynthesis, right? So all plants need that. But if you get full spectrum, it not only has the red blue, it also has the yellow light. And so it's all the wavelengths that it kind of mimics that we'd get from the sun. And so you don't have to think about which time of year you want to put in the red blue light, which time you want the yellow light. If you do full spectrum, it's one you can keep on the whole time. And so I usually look for full spectrum. It's just the easiest one to deal with because I can set it up and kind of forget about it. I don't have to constantly pay attention to seasons, right? So full spectrum is basically the thing to keep an eye out for when you're looking at plant lights, and it'll have it on the boxes. And like I said, you can get the plant lights that are already put together, like the halo lights, clip lights, strip lights that are all together. Or what I've found to be a cheaper route and almost easier route for me is to buy grow light bulbs and using a regular clamp light. So you can get these clamp lights at like big box stores like Walmart or Target. You can also find them sometimes cheaper at like a Home Depot or a Lowe's. You can buy them on Amazon. They don't have to be anything special, just a regular everyday clamp light. And you can put in your full spectrum grow light, and it works just as well and is oftentimes cheaper than getting the whole setup. So there are a couple options for grow lights. Like I said, getting the full kit where everything's included, or just getting the light bulbs that you can screw in. I know I have a friend who didn't use clamp lights, but has in one room of her house, she just put grow lights in the light fixtures. And so like that takes care of all the plants, which was really clever. It's like, that was smart. So there are a couple ways to kind of use those light bulbs as well. But again, the main thing to pay attention to, whether you're doing the full, like the complete kit or the light bulbs, the main thing to pay attention to is the full spectrum, because that mimics everything the plant needs from the sun. Okay. And then I'm happy to talk more about that too. We're going to open up for questions in just a moment. But the last thing I want to mention that's on the handout is humidifiers and glass domes. Actually, before I do that, we talked about the grow lights. One thing that I have found that is like a fun little hack is setting up strategic mirrors. You don't have to have like direct sunlight. Sometimes having mirrors in the right places can bring that light to the different plants too. So having maybe one grow light, but having it next to a mirror can help amplify that too. So a mirror is kind of like a little hack too. Just saying that about the grow lights. All right, and then humidifiers and glass domes. This is just what plants need, right? If you have a hydroponic garden, one of the things that you do in the beginning is that when you plant your seed, you have a little plastic dome that you put over the pod, and it traps in that humidity, that moisture, because that helps the plant grow. It helps stimulate the plant growth so it can sprout easier. It starts rooting faster. That humidity is important. You don't leave that dome on the whole time, just while it's sprouting. But if you have a humidifier, it's good to have that close to your plants. You'll find that your plants, just like when you have your plant close to a plant light, you'll see it start to really flourish next to a humidifier. Paying attention to temperature is kind of important, right? One thing you can do if you don't have a humidifier or those fancy glass domes that you can get to trap that humidity in, one of the things that you can do is take like a gallon jug or a big bottle of soda once it's empty, and cut that top part off and turn it upside down and use that as a dome. So you don't have to use like the fancy expensive stuff too. You can use, if you're a soda drinker, you can use that soda bottle or milk jug as that dome to help trap in that humidity. And like I said, you'll really find that your plants are starting to flourish once they're around that humidity too. All right. So I know we kind of went through a bunch of stuff, and I know time goes so fast, but I do want to pause here and see if there are any questions that are coming up. I know we've got some in the chat.
I have a lot lined up for you, Ruth, when you're ready.
Perfect. Let me have it.
So starting from the beginning when we were talking about banana water, we had some questions about, can the peels be from overripe bananas? And should you keep the banana water in the fridge or on the counter? Does that matter?
Oh, good question. So any banana peel works. If you like, as soon as you eat your banana or use it for baking or whatever, just stick that peel in the water for a few days. You don't want it too long, like a week is kind of a little like that's on the long side. But just a few days is all you need. I usually stick it in the fridge. And let it sit there. When it's colder like that, it kind of lasts a little longer. So I have an extra day or two with it. But keeping it in the fridge is always a good idea. Yeah.
Awesome. We had a question about how often can you use the water? I think this was for any of our water options. Is there a certain amount of time you should wait before using it again?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, so how do we word this? So it's good to use that because it has those extra nutrients in it, right? Using that potato water, the rice water, the vegetable water, the banana water. But you don't want to use that every single time. Sometimes that soil can get oversaturated. So maybe like once a week or a couple times a month, adding it in there to feed is good. But you don't want to do that every time.
We
Good
also
question.
have a bunch of questions that kind of go together, so I'm going to combine them into one question. But a lot of people are asking, can you use some of these hacks for like houseplants and orchids as well? And then, are there specific plants that benefit more or less from each of the recycled water options? Um, does it matter which nutrients you use for which plant?
Yeah, yeah, yes, 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 I think. So, yeah, even houseplants can benefit from the water, right? So if you have banana water, that works really well for things like monsteras, pothos, philodendrons, snake plants, like common house plants love banana water. And the same with like potato water, rice water, vegetable water. Common house plants, the most common house plants like it. The only thing to kind of keep in mind when you're doing like these extra little fertilizers is the coffee grounds. Those are for the plants that like highly acidic soil. And the main plants there are ginger root and mushrooms. And everything else really likes those eggshells. So that's the kind of only like main thing to keep an eye out for. But that potato water, rice water, vegetable water, banana water, that's good for like almost all common houseplants and for many of the vegetables and herbs that we grow. I would say it wouldn't hurt to use the banana water on all the plants that you have that we've talked about regrowing, rooting.
A bunch of the next questions are, um, I guess they'll have quick answers. So one of them is the water used to cook beans useful?
Yes.
Beautiful. Um, with the eggshells, should you wash or boil them first?
Oh, good question. So I just rinsed out my eggshells, kind of not really washed them with soap and water, but just kind of rinsed them out so like that yolk wasn't sticky, and it wasn't kind of inviting bugs in. So rinsing it out is always a good idea. So I let it rinse, I set it in a bowl, let it kind of dry, and then I put it in that bag to crush.
One participant asks, do you think it would be helpful to use like tea bag water or tea to actually root the plants?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm gonna have to do a little research on that and get back next month. Where's my paper? Here we go. That it would make sense, especially for the green tea, because that helps stimulate the root growth. So it would make sense for that it would help for rooting certain things, but I'm gonna do a little research on that and get back. Very good
Awesome.
question.
Someone asks they use flavored green tea and coffees to cut out sugar and artificial sweetener. Do you think this would still be okay to use?
Mm. Ugh, that's a good question. Um, I I'm not sure of the answer, but my instinct is to say if you have extra flavors in there, that may not be the best for adding to plants. However, things like cinnamon, I know that cinnamon can help protect against certain pests. And also, like, it can help help a plant heal itself. Cinnamon can. So like there are some things that you can add as flavoring if it's natural flavoring. Um, that like could be helpful. That's something else I'm going to research as well. But my instinct is to say no on that, unless someone else has experience with that.
We also have a couple questions that just came in about tea grounds or tea leaves. Can you use those as a fertilizer? Because I know we talked about the tea itself, but what about the
The
grounds?
Yeah, so you totally could, just like you could with the coffee grounds, add those tea leaves in. Um, It's like for green tea especially, that's one you can totally use. Again, helping stimulate that root growth. So adding that in. And I will say, my grandmother for years fed the leftover tea and coffee to her plants, and she was like a master gardener. So just looking at that, I would say, yes, ideal. But going back to things like those coffee grounds, that's for highly acidic soil, for plants that like that acid, that need that extra nitrogen. And I would assume like the tea leaves, just like for the green tea, if the green tea helps stimulate that growth, I feel like those tea leaves would be just as beneficial.
Awesome. One more question with the same theme as before about houseplants. Someone's wondering if these waters would be good for succulents as well, because those are a bit different.
Yes. So banana water is excellent for succulents. So if you have succulents or cactus, banana water is the ideal one to use.
Would banana water work as like something you spray on the plants as well, or should you just be watering the soil with it?
Oh, that's good. Um, that's a really good question. I think probably putting it in the soil. I think when there's a chance of putting it on the plant itself, you might get like attract the bugs and stuff that it has that residue on there. So it's probably a better idea to make sure you're just pouring that into the soil or doing the bottom watering with it instead of spraying it onto the plant. Probably stick to just like clean water for that part, that spray.
I have five more questions from the chat as of now, but I wanted to remind everyone that if you have a question you want to ask out loud, you can always raise your hand and we can switch
Oh,
over there as well. We've had a couple questions about how long you should keep these waters before you dispose of them.
Oh, really good question. So typically they're good for like a couple days. If you put it in the fridge, I would say maybe 3 or 4 days max. They're not going to last long, right? So the fresher you can use, like the sooner you can use them, the fresher it is, the better for the banana water, rice water, those things.
Amazing. Let's look around. Someone asked earlier about your kitty litter suggestion. If kitty litter sometimes adds chemicals and stuff like that, would it be smart to check for those first?
Yes. Yes. You don't want any of that in there. So as it feels weird saying as pure a kitty litter as you can get. It's better. It's good in a pinch. Perlite is definitely the best way to go because there's no added chemicals, there's no like debris, like any of that in there. Everything about perlite is good for plants to help aerate that soil. Kitty litter is something you can use in a pinch. Um, if you need, but yeah, you definitely want to make sure there's no like added fragrances or any of those extras in there. Good question.
Awesome. Now we have a question more related to the humidifier that we were talking about earlier. Would misting the plants give a similar result as a humidifier, or does that do something different?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. It's always a good idea to mist your plants. Like, it helps kind of mimic rain, right? It gets that water on the leaves. Most of the water that a plant needs is going to need to go through that soil, go through the roots. But they do need that water on the leaves too. So if you can mist, that's definitely a good idea. You don't need a lot of it, right? Just a little misting is good, a little spraying. And if you have a humidifier, or like a glass dome or one of the the hack domes that we talked about with the jugs, you don't have to mist as often because that does kind of mimic that. Good question.
Someone asked about you said it was called perlite.
Perlite,
Is
yeah.
there a specific ratio that you should be using when adding that to soil?
Oh, excellent. So I don't have the bag of perlite with me, but on every bag you get that has perlite on it, it'll give you the ratios.
Awesome. Um, we
I
have
always
a
have to
lot of
look when I edit.
yes, of course. We have a lot of questions that have come in throughout the session about fruit flies, which I think we had some questions about last time as well. Do you get them a lot when you're growing in your kitchen, and how to some of these hacks maybe get rid of them?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question. And we could, I know our time is coming close to an end. And so maybe next month we could spend a hunk of time talking about pests. Um, like next week too. But fruit flies, I know that's like a big concern, especially if you're using like compost. It kind of invites them in. I will say I've used banana water and I've used potato water, and I've not had any issues with fruit flies. I know there are some things that you can do to kind of get rid of them once you get them, but just by making sure you have clean water, making sure you're aerating your soil, doing things like that helps kind of prevent the fruit flies from coming in. I know sometimes it's hard when you're using that compost because you're inviting in like all those nutrients from like fruits and vegetables and things like that. And if you are cleaning like eggshells, for example, if you're cleaning out that yolk, like just kind of rinsing that out, getting rid of it, you don't have any of that food debris on there to invite the pests in. If you're doing something like banana water, it's banana infused water that's going inside the soil. And if your soil is aerated, like if you have that perlite in there, or whatever it is that helps kind of eggshells even to help with that drainage, that again helps prevent um, a lot of those pests from coming in.
Awesome. Most of the questions rolling in are really specific to specific types of plants, and I think you have really touched on the fact that, well, got to be careful more with coffee grounds and other things. The banana water is great for just about every plant out there. Someone was asking for some advice on a small ornamental bush that doesn't seem to stay moist no matter how much you water it. Do you have any suggestions?
So a humidifier may be the way to go with something like that. I I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of experience with a lot of like ornamental plants. But if you are having some trouble with the soil staying moist, like some plants need drier soil, like succulents, for example, they need a drier soil. And so you don't want it to hold that moisture. But the humidifier does help with stuff like that. I did see a comment, not to go off on a tangent, but I did see a comment about the bananas, how the fruit flies come in on the bananas. And one thing I didn't mention that I do want to go back to is that like if you have the banana skins just sitting out, of course you're going to have some issues. So it's always what I've done that I've found helpful that helps prevent that is putting the banana skins in the water, closing it up in like a mason jar and sticking it in the fridge, because then you're kind of stopping anything from getting to it. And then when you're pouring that water in, you just get rid of that banana skin. So it's just that water. So those are a couple ways to kind of prevent those fruit flies specifically from the banana water. And again, it's only just like a few days. If you had it for like a week, or if it was sitting out on the counter, you're more likely to have those fruit flies come in because they have access to the banana peel. But putting it in a jar and sticking it in the fridge is one way to kind of prevent that.
Yeah, two more things people were kind of curious about. One of them, I hate to say I don't know how to pronounce, so I'm going to spell it. It's spelled COIR. Seems to be like the outer husk of a coconut. Someone was asking if you know if that is good for vegetables, unless that was a typo, in which case please re-put that in the chat. And then someone was also asking about packing peanuts for
Yeah.
drainage.
Yeah, so I've actually used packing peanuts before. That's not a long-term solution, but it has worked. That styrofoam does help aerate the soil. So if you have a plant that's really struggling there, doing something like that in a pinch can be helpful. Definitely that perlite is going to be better for it. But like I have I've used packing peanuts in a pinch for sure. I don't know about the husk of coconut.
Yeah,
Um,
coconut fiber.
yeah, that would make sense. It would, I would think that would help like lock in moisture too if it's in the soil. Um, I'm gonna look up that too. I'm gonna research. I got some research to do.
Um, it does look like, based on what I found just now, that it's great at helping with aeration and creating a pH neutral environment.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I did see, I think it was back um, about orchids, about the banana water and things like that for orchids. I know that orchids are kind of very particular plants. You can easily overwater them. I have a little experience with orchids, but I have found that still the best thing for orchids is to make sure that you have that moss in there, that what is it, sphagnum moss that helps kind of lock in that moisture and kind of hold in those roots. The sawdust too, like wood chips, and also just watering with ice cubes has been like the easiest way to work with orchids. I'm not an expert in orchids, but I have found that that's the easiest way to kind of grow those orchids. Yeah. Yes. Yes, some packing peanuts. Thank you for adding that in. There are some packing peanuts that wouldn't be like detrimental at all, putting it in the soil. The biodegradable ones would be perfect. Yeah, these are really great questions, great tips. I know that our time is coming up, but I have very much enjoyed our time together. If there are other questions that come up that we didn't get to, I apologize if I missed them, but please reach out. You can send us an email to our, I think the Kits at Mather email is the one we're using for this one, or post it on our Facebook page. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can. Also go to my experts and ask questions, pick their brain too. I know there are others who are definitely more experienced than I, so I'm happy to research too. But if any questions do come up, please reach out. We'll definitely, I think our next garden session, scrap kitchen, scrap gardening kitchen session, whatever it's
April
called.
30th.
Yes, April 30th. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So April 30th. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do. We'll kind of touch back on things that we've been talking about, but we'll have other topics that we cover as well. So come with questions, come with your tips. And last month's video is on YouTube. I know Laura's put the link in the chat too, but you can find it through going to YouTube and just looking up our channel, Mather Creative Community. This video should be out there shortly, so you can reference back here as well. Well, thank you again, everyone. Like I said, really enjoy our time. I'm always excited to talk about gardening. One of my favorite things to do. So thank you for letting me chat today and for joining me. I wish you luck with your scrap garden, and I'm excited to be back with you all next month. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. We'll see you soon.